What about where we are now in Iraq then? To talk about the democratic tsunami, there's a democracy, there's elections. There's an election coming up in March, I think it is. There's elections in Afghanistan, flawed though they may be, there's elections.
Indeed.
Democratically elected government. Is this a positive?
Well, I think whenever you have a government that's elected, rather than put in place by a coup d'etat or whatever, that in general is a positive development. Was the war worth it to get the very limited democratic system that is in place in Iraq? And it's very limited. No, I'd say it wasn't. Certainly not, I'm speaking as an American, in terms of American national interests. I think it's very hard to argue that war was an intelligent decision. I also think, it killed an enormous number of Iraqis.
And goes on killing.
And goes on killing. And would most Iraqis say, well, thank God that the Americans came and got rid of Saddam? I think a lot of them would not agree with that. It would be interesting if you could have a real poll that would... certainly a few years ago, it was very common to hear from people, this has been a disaster, what are you doing here? Oh my God, why did this happen? Whether the opinions now are slightly more nuanced or not, I don't know. But I think it was a bad mistake, not least because it was, if you're looking at this in terms of the broader war on terror, as it was conceived by the Bush administration, this essentially, the invasion and occupation of an Arab country, was essentially stepping into the very caricature that Osama bin Laden had made of the United States, just the way those images from Abu Ghraib, notably that image of Lindy England, the female American soldier standing there in fatigues holding a leash going down to the neck of a naked Iraqi man whose face is scrunched in agony and humiliation. That was a perfect poster for Osama's entire message, which is that the United States humiliates, emasculates, destroys Arabs. And, those images basically simply reaffirmed them. And, of course, the images were real. This was not a poster they put together. They were real.
And you say it like this in the book. You say, America became the America the jihadists depicted, an imperial, aggressive, blundering power that managed by means of lurid, deathless images of tortured Muslims to prove to the world that all of its purported respect for human rights and freedom was nothing but base hypocrisy.
I guess that's kind of critical as well. Huh? Yeah, and I think that, it's an interesting fact about Barack Obama, I think, that he has a very different understanding of the political reality of the war on terror, or the war on the global struggle against violent extremism, which the military wanted to change the war on terror to at some point. They wanted to call it GSAVE, Global Struggle Against Violent Extremism. And they got the entire government on board. This was around 2005, except the president, God bless him, kept saying war on terror, war on terror, war on terror. He just liked it too much. But Obama has a very different understanding of the war as a political war, because after all, when you think of this, and I put war sort of in quotation marks here, but when you think about it, the war on terror is not going to end with the United States killing every jihadist. Presumably it will end, or it will at least slack off, at a certain moment when you don't have a rising number of people who, one way or another, want to support the jihadist cause. I mean, you can think of it, when you think of the strategy of the war, think of it as a target, an archery target, where, at the very red, is it a yellow center or a red center? The red center, you have jihadist active people who are blowing things up, who are setting bombs, training, etc. And then you have a circle around them in which you have people who are actively helping them, another circle around them in which you have people who are giving them money, another circle in which you have people who are politically sympathetic to them, and another in which people are, look at them, don't turn them in, but don't necessarily support them. And seen in this way, the strategy behind the global war on terror, or the global struggle against violent extremism, is to stop those people from moving to the center. To stop the people supporting from becoming active jihadists, to stop, et cetera, et cetera.
But that's the constant struggle to get that right. I mean, that's what they're still struggling with in Afghanistan now, with this latest surge, whatever you want to call it, counterinsurgency, or the Petraeuses, the McChrystals, the Kilcullens of this world are desperately trying to get that right. Are they getting any closer, do you think? Which basically means rewriting the script from the America the torturers to America the helpers, the builders, the saviours.
Yes. God, I'm trying not to say blundering and critical things again. I think it's very hard at this point. I think the president understands things in a rather subtler way. He doesn't see this as a war of good versus evil. On the other hand, he's taking great political damage at home because he doesn't see it that way.
Is he?
Yes, he is. The Republican Party is attacking him quite successfully by saying, well, you don't really believe this is a war. You're not willing to torture. You're not willing to, the Christmas bomber, or the so-called underpants bomber, was given his Miranda rights, his civil rights, 90 minutes after he was taken into custody. And the Republican Party has been very vigorous in saying, how could you do that? You're not protecting the country. And not the least egregious, I think, holdover from the war on terror, which we are in one way or another still in the middle of, is this use of what had been considered key parts of the American political creed, the credo of what makes Americans Americans, which comes down to civil rights, human rights, the Constitution, all men created equal in the original formulation.
The rule of law.
The rule of law. That has become, the means by which the opposition denounces the administration, which is a remarkable thing. And that is kind of the reality of where torture and the Bush administration techniques have taken us, that it's been embedded in American politics in a way that's very noxious, I think.
But as you say, that has also allowed America to be depicted, certainly is amongst the Islamic world, as the very picture of evil that they are crusading against, that the jihadists anyway are crusading against. And surely it was partly to undo that damage to their image that the American people voted Bush out and voted Obama in. I mean, I thought that the Abu Ghraib photos and that changed the whole popular support of the war. That people were shocked by that.
Well, remember that the Abu Ghraib photographs were made public, were broadcast and published in the spring of 2004. So it was an election year, and the election between George W. Bush and John Kerry. Remember him?
Yes.
No one mentioned torture. It was not an issue in the election at all. The Democrats perceived it as not a winning issue for them. And George Bush, of course, was in fact reelected, and no one talked about torture.
But the election of Obama, was that a sense that Americans were pleased to have this opportunity to relaunch themselves, if you like, and their image globally, and become that sort of upstanding global citizen again? And does Obama see that as part of his mission?
Oh, I think he certainly sees it as part of his mission. I mean, perhaps people here saw the Cairo speech. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that was very much, I covered the campaign, and he basically would say at each campaign stop, I'm going to go to a major Arab capital, and I'm going to talk to Muslims, especially young Muslims, and tell them that the United States is different than they think it is. And I thought that was a remarkable speech, an eloquent speech, and very salutary. I mean, very welcome that he made it. And it was remarkable. I was in California when it happened, so I stayed up until, I think it was 4 a.m. and watched it live. And I was struck by it. The quotations from the Quran. It was a beautifully written speech. But at the same time, his doing that speech underlines the limitations of what a president can do and the necessity, perhaps, for more vigorous action. Let me try to explain what I mean. He's standing there in Cairo. He's giving this beautiful speech. He's talking about the need for political development. He's talking about the United States standing for democracy and human rights. And of course, he's under the shadow of a regime that is autocratic, that tortures, that has been ruling under a state of emergency for 3 decades now, and to which the United States gives every year $2 billion. Now, this has been American policy since the early 70s. So, while Barack Obama was in grammar school, this policy was put in place, as it was 60 years ago, the policy of the United States and the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. Now, if you look at what the jihadists, their problem with the United States, the heart of it is that the U.S. is the puppet master behind these repressive, apostate regimes. That is, these regimes claim to be Islamic, they're not. They're simply the cat's paw of the United States. Now, Obama stands in the Capitol, in Cairo. He talks about the U.S. as a beacon of human rights, but at the same time, he's under the shadow of a regime that the U.S. supports, and that, if it could get its hands on those jihadists, would torture them severely, as it has, by the way, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the number 2 man to Osama bin Laden. So, it's one thing to emit this kind of rhetoric, which is brilliant, by the way, and is very important. I think it's very important. It's not negligible. But it's another thing to try to change the policy, because the policy has to do with problems that have been part of the U.S. global role as a superpower for years. The supporting of dictatorships throughout Latin America, for example, as an alternative to perhaps communist penetration. We have the same thing now on a different scale in the Middle East, the U.S. supporting autocracies in part as a bulwark against Islamic revolution. So that political problem still is there. And how do you solve it if you're Barack Obama? We're talking about a much more radical change in how the U.S. operates in the world. And no one is talking about that.
It's like you can't change it. It's like he can't change it. So his only response to getting bogged down in Afghanistan, and in fact going backwards in Afghanistan, in the good war that he promised to give his all to, is to put all $5 billion, wasn't it, to Pakistan?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a flawed authority in Pakistan. So it's like he has to go down into that vortex. But then he can give the symbolism, at least, of that speech in Cairo. But what sort of symbolism is he giving back at home, and do you believe that he's even dropped the ball there, given that he announced and came in on a platform on day one, I think, a ban on torture? But there is just 2 weeks ago, John Yoo and Jay Bybee completely let off the hook. They were the Justice Department lawyers who gave the green light, signed off on the torture regime
John Yoo is
Bush.
my colleague on the Berkeley faculty. He lives right up the street from me, so I can hear some days the ladies of Code Pink, saying, you have to go. I don't know what the chants are, but I kind of wake up in the morning and
clearly
they're
no
chanting.
appetite there for any kind of truth commission or any kind of
No, I think
payment.
No. Well, life is long, and the fact is there's going to have to be a way to get out of the whole conundrum of torture. And a case has been brought in Spanish court, for example, under universal jurisdiction against the lawyers. That case will proceed one way or another. There is a case in federal court brought by Jose Padilla against John Yoo. I mean, there are various cases going down the various slow, frozen rivers of the court system, both internationally and domestically. And these cases have a way of eventually reaching some sort of conclusion. I think Obama feels he's in an untenable position when it has to do with decisions that the Bush administration made. If he starts to prosecute people in the CIA who imposed these policies, he will lose the intelligence community. They will rebel against him, which is perilous for a politician. It will be perceived by a lot of people as unfair because these people were indeed following orders. The Nuremberg echo is real, but it's true. They have next to what the CIA, it's very interesting how torture happened. The CIA in the mid-'70s, there's a notorious investigation in the United States called the Church Commission, which unveiled all the dirty laundry of the CIA, including a number of assassinations. And that lives as a nightmare in the history of the CIA. And when the administration made it clear to the intelligence community, we want you to torture these guys, basically, the CIA had a simple answer, which is, if you do, show me the document that says it's legal. They called it the Golden Shield. So until the Department of Justice wrote out these memos, which you can now read, I published them in my book 6 years ago, until they did that and redefined waterboarding as not torture, the CIA was not and would not do it. So now you have an entire government that essentially is corrupted by these decisions. Everybody at the top knew about it. They talked about it. So, do you put George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Donald Rumsfeld, John Ashcroft, you can go down the whole list and march them all up in front of the judge? As I put it that way, I'm thinking, well, is that a rhetorical question? So you have the entire government implicated, and that mass implication is what, to some degree, protects them. And it wouldn't be fair to simply prosecute the people who did the waterboarding, because they were indeed looking at legal documents and doing it. I mean, we can argue about that. Obviously, the Nuremberg defense has its own problems. But we're in a similar situation. It's as if, the Germans had not been defeated, and all those things they did under the Nuremberg laws were legal. Well, in the United States, all those things that happened in those rooms, in secret rooms in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Poland, the black sites that I've written about, all those things are now considered officially legal.
It's incredible, and what's incredible too is that our time is up. Just
that
before
is
I let you go, I know. Before I let you go, just one quick. I don't know if you can answer this quickly, but we're a long way from your country here. But we watch. There was a lot of interest in the election of Barack Obama. 1 year on, he looks to be in not a good state politically. Is he likely to be a one-term president?
Goodness, Yogi Berra said I never make predictions, especially about the future. And so I'm going to, he was a wise baseball player, and I'm not going to make a prediction. I think that the reports of his demise are much exaggerated. I have a lot of respect for him as a politician. I certainly wouldn't make a prediction like that now. I think he has a lot of life left in him, but it's an indication of the poisonous political atmosphere in the United States.
Well, do you think, let me put it this way, do you think Afghanistan could be his undoing?
I think it's possible, although Americans are very quick to forget things. Amnesia is a key part of American foreign policy thinking. Nobody talks about Iraq now. You have to kill 100 people with a bomb in order for Iraq to make the news. And I think it's quite possible also that Afghanistan, I hear myself about to say this and think, don't say that. I was going to say that Afghanistan might get appreciably worse, but not blow up, and they might manage it in some way. I think that's quite possible. But I think he's very conscious of the fact that this could be the thing that undermines him. And he bought his dovishness on Iraq during the campaign with hawkishness on Afghanistan. That's essentially the Faustian bargain that he struck. And he's kind of paying that Faustian bargain now. Could I say something, by the way? This book is dedicated to my mother, and I had this dedication in my mind for a long time. I think it says... I'll
just find it. For my mother, in partial answer to her favourite question, why can't you go somewhere nice for a change?
And this has become over 25 years. Whenever I say, Mom, I'm about to go on this trip, and they hate you go to Iraq or whatever they did. My parents just don't know what to say about this, and so they usually just shut up. But I know they really don't like it. And my mother, the most she'll do now is say that, can't you go somewhere nice for a change? And we both laugh. I was very glad to put that on. And actually, she was in the hospital when the galleys of the book arrived, and I brought them to her. She was kind of doped up, about to have an operation, and she looked at the dedication and started cackling to such an extent that the nurse ran in and thought there was some serious health problem. Anyway, I bring it up because I was doing an interview today, and this journalist said, by the way, I was talking about how much I loved Melbourne. I've never visited before. I've been in Australia before, but never Melbourne. And I love, the city is so wonderful and beautiful and pleasant. And I've just loved sitting on in cafes and watching the people walk by and walking around. I just love the town. I'm going to move here, I think, and if you'll have me. I was saying this, yet again to this guy I was doing the interview with, and he brought up the dedication, and he said, you should take the opportunity to call your mother, and and tell her that you've gone somewhere nice for a change. So I did indeed pick up the phone right after I finished with him, called her up, woke her up actually, and told her all about Melbourne. And then the punchline was, Mom, give me credit. I've finally gone somewhere nice for a change. So she has vowed to come and visit you in Melbourne as well. So you may see her on the street.
Mike Denner, thank you very much.
Thank you.